Positioned at a pivotal turning point in Western history, having not only foreseen its causes and outcomes, but also proposing bold, transformative ideas as solutions, Friedrich Nietzsche stands as one of the most impactful philosophers of the modern era. The unique historical moment he confronted was the decline of traditional Western religious belief, which left behind a vast existential void. With that faith unraveling, society seemed to face only one grim alternative: the descent into pessimism and nihilism. Nietzsche's life work centered on offering a third route away from both religion and nihilism toward a renewed sense of meaning and human value. Nietzsche was born in 1844 in Saxony, Prussia, now part of modern-day Eastern Germany. Raised in a modest household, his early life was quiet and protected. His father, Karl Ludwig Nietzsche, was a Lutheran pastor, which meant young Friedrich was immersed in Christian teachings from the start. But this foundation was quickly shaken. His father, a man of deep faith, was diagnosed with a fatal brain disorder, suffering intensely before dying at just 35. The following year, Friedrich's younger brother also died. This harsh exposure to seemingly senseless suffering at a young age likely formed part of the backdrop for Nietzsche's later philosophical inquiry. After a somber and somewhat isolated childhood, Nietzsche enrolled at the University of Bonn to study theology. He excelled academically, particularly in Christian thought. However, after just one semester, and upon encountering strong intellectual challenges to religious doctrine, Nietzsche abandoned his faith-shedding, what he saw as naive devotion. He then turned to philology, the study of language history, at the University of Leipzig. His talent was so remarkable that still in his 20s, he was appointed professor of classical philology at the University of Basel, becoming the youngest to hold the position. Nietzsche's academic career was short-lived. He resigned after a few years, partly due to growing dissatisfaction with academic life, and partly due to his deteriorating health linked to both inherited conditions and possibly syphilis contracted from a brothel. He would spend the remainder of his coherent years living quietly across various European locations, seeking climates that suited his health and surviving on a modest university pension. He eventually settled primarily in the Swiss Alps, where he spent most of his mentally stable years. During this time, despite physical illness, romantic rejection, fractured relationships, and periods of depression, Nietzsche immersed himself in walking, thinking, and writing. These solitary pursuits became his refuge and purpose. It was in these years that he wrote his most influential works: Human, All Too Human, The Gay Science, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Beyond Good and Evil, and On the Genealogy of Morals. These texts laid the foundations for a radically new kind of philosophy, one that aimed to challenge the very basis of contemporary truths, morality, and knowledge itself. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. These lines are among Nietzsche's most quoted, often misunderstood as celebratory. In truth, they express deep concern. The collapse of Christianity, he warned, meant the collapse of the moral and rational structures built upon it. Without a replacement system of value or belief, society risked falling into nihilism. For Nietzsche, the collapse wasn't a triumph but a crisis. To address this, he emphasized that there are no absolute truth. There are no facts, only interpretations, he wrote. He rejected the idea of a universal truth, arguing that the search for one had led people away from real meaning. According to Nietzsche, pursuing objective truth drained life of its personal and emotional richness. Instead, he turned to the arts, music, literature, philosophy as ways to express individual truth and restore deeper meaning. Yet, he found even culture could become hollow and commodified, losing its authenticity. This realization pushed Nietzsche toward developing a philosophy that empowered the individual, not society or culture, to define meaning. This belief culminated in the idea of the Übermensch, translated as the Overman or Superman, first introduced in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. The Übermensch represents the ideal individual, self-reliant, bold, and unapologetically true to their personal values. This figure challenges norms, acts with controlled selfishness, and seeks greatness. Nietzsche argued that traditional Christian morality, which praised humility and weakness, didn't reflect human nature. Instead, he believed people needed a new ethical framework that celebrated strength, ambition, and vitality. While this idea has sparked valid criticism and serious misinterpretation, the symbolic role of the Übermensch remains central. It stands as an aspirational version of oneself, a personal ideal to strive toward, never fully reachable, but motivating nonetheless. At the heart of Nietzsche's view is the will to power, a core drive he saw in all life, not just to survive, but to grow and assert strength. The world is the will to power and nothing besides, he wrote. Importantly, Nietzsche didn't mean domination over others, but mastery over oneself. Spiritual and psychological strength, developed through continuous self-overcoming, was for him the highest alignment with life's essence. By striving toward the idealized self, individuals could turn suffering into purpose and meaning. If we have our own why in life, we shall get along with almost anyhow, he wrote. Unlike his predecessor Schopenhauer, who advocated for minimizing suffering, Nietzsche saw suffering as necessary and even beneficial. He argued that rather than avoid it, we should embrace it and use it as a tool for personal transformation. Life, in his view, is inherently painful, so the question becomes not if we suffer, but for what purpose. The meaninglessness of suffering, not suffering itself, was the curse that lay over mankind, he observed. As Nietzsche continued his work and lived in solitude, his mental health began to unravel. At 44, he witnessed a horse being beaten in the street. In a moment of emotional collapse, he ran to the horse, embraced it, and cried, "I understand you." This marked the beginning of his mental breakdown, an episode that seemed in stark contrast to his own teachings on power and resilience. Shortly after, he fell into permanent psychosis, eventually becoming catatonic. One of modern history's most profound thinkers was silenced by the weight of his own mind. Whether the breakdown stemmed from illness or the burden of his introspection remains unknown. Nietzsche died of a stroke in 1900 at just 55. By his own standards, Nietzsche may have considered his life a failure. His book sold poorly, and he received little recognition while alive. Yet after his death, his work gained widespread influence, though some interpretations were misapplied in damaging ways. Still, his ideas, phrases, and warnings remain embedded in modern thought, both in language and spirit. In an ironic twist, Nietzsche's own philosophy of symbolic self-death and rebirth, of becoming one's truest self through sacrifice, seems reflected in his own life and legacy. Perhaps his struggle and eventual breakdown were, in a way, part of the very self-overcoming he described. Nietzsche's philosophy is not without criticism, particularly his ideas on self-overcoming and the pursuit of greatness through suffering. While his observations of modern existential dilemmas were insightful, his solutions may not fit everyone. Can suffering always be seen as growth? Can meaning truly be self-created if one doesn't already believe life holds value? If someone's experience of life is inherently negative, then Nietzsche's framework may lead them back to the same void he sought to fill, suggesting they need meaning beyond themselves, something unreachable through internal striving alone. Moreover, Nietzsche's thought doesn't follow a strict system and often contains contradictions, allowing for many interpretations. But that may be the point. His work doesn't prescribe how to think, it invites each person to think for themselves. In that way, Nietzsche challenges us not to adopt his ideas, but to do what he did, carve our own path.